I'm Captain Brianna Vega, 31 years old, U.S. Army Black Hawk pilot, call sign Reaper 6. For years, I was the steady one, the daughter who showed up, paid off debts, handled crises, and never asked for much in return. But when I came home from 14 months in Mosul and my own family laughed at my call sign over dinner, called it, made up, a video game name, I made a different choice. I stopped explaining myself. Have you ever been mocked or dismissed by someone you'd done everything for? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being undervalued, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about respect, boundaries, and reclaiming your worth. Because what happened next changed everything. I came home on a Friday in late September, the kind of Virginia afternoon where the air still held summer, but the trees were starting to turn. My duffel hit the floor of my parents' foyer with a thud that felt heavier than it should have. 14 months. That's how long I'd been gone this time, longer than any previous deployment. Mom came around the corner wiping her hands on a dish towel, and for a second, we just looked at each other. "Brianna," she said, and then I was in her arms, breathing in the same floral detergent smell from childhood. Dad appeared behind her, slower, more reserved. He shook my hand, actually shook it, before pulling me into an awkward side hug. "Good to have you back, kiddo," he said. I'd grown up in this house. Knew every creak in the floorboards, every stain on the kitchen counter. But standing there in my civilian clothes, jeans and a plain gray hoodie, I felt like a visitor. The dining room table was set for 5. Ethan and Lena were coming over. A welcome home dinner, Mom had said on the phone. Nothing fancy, just family. Nothing fancy. That was the theme of my relationship with them, really. Nothing too serious, nothing too deep. When I joined ROTC at 20, Dad had called it a good way to pay for school. When I got my commission, Mom told her book club I was doing something with helicopters. When I made captain at 28, Ethan asked if that meant I got to park closer to the building. They loved me. I knew that. But they'd never quite figured out what to do with me. I'd always been the steady one. The problem solver. When Ethan's car got repossessed during my second deployment, I'd sent him $3,000 from my combat pay. When Mom's roof needed replacing, I'd coordinated the contractors from a base in Germany. When Lena struggled to pay her freshman year housing deposit, I'd covered it without asking for repayment. It's what you did for family. You showed up. You fixed things. But there was an imbalance I'd started to notice, especially over the last few years. They'd take the help, send a grateful text, then go weeks without checking in. During my last deployment, I'd sent photos, sometimes nothing classified, just landscapes, the occasional shot of our birds on the flight line at sunset. Ethan had responded to one with, "Hope the food's better than your last sandbox vacation." I'd laughed it off at the time. Civilians didn't get it. That was fine. Lena arrived first, bounding through the door with the kind of energy only a 21-year-old college junior could sustain. She hugged me hard, told me I looked tired, asked if I'd gotten taller. I hadn't. She was just remembering me wrong. "How was it?" she asked, and I could see she meant it. "Long," I said. "But good. We did good work." She nodded like she understood, but I could see the distance in her eyes. Good work. What did that mean to someone whose biggest crisis this year was a broken laptop? Ethan showed up 20 minutes later with Megan, his wife of 3 years. Megan had a way of smiling that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of expression you'd use when someone showed you a finger painting and you had to be polite. She hugged me, told me I looked so strong, then immediately asked if I'd had time to date overseas. "Not really the priority," I said. Right, she said, laughing. "Guess you were pretty busy." Dinner was pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans. Comfort food. The kind of meal that was supposed to make you feel like everything was normal. We sat around the table, and Dad said grace, something he only did when I was home, like he thought I needed the ritual. Then we ate, and the conversation started. "So," Ethan said, cutting into his meat. 14 months. That's gotta be some kind of record. "Standard deployment rotation," I said. "Just how it worked out." "Still flying those Blackhawks?" "Yeah. Must be nice," Megan said. "I mean, seeing the world and everything." I nodded. Seeing the world. That was one way to put it. Do you get, like, a special name or something? Lena asked. I saw a movie once where the pilots all had nicknames. Call signs, I said. Yeah, we have those. What's yours? She asked. I hesitated. It wasn't something I advertised. Call signs carried weight in the unit. They were earned, not given. But here, at this table, it felt strange to say it out loud. Reaper 6, I said. The room went quiet for half a beat, and then Ethan laughed. Not a chuckle, a full laugh, head tilted back. Reaper 6, he repeated. Seriously? That's mine, I said evenly. That sounds like something from a video game, Megan said, grinning. Like, did you pick it yourself? Is that how it works? It's assigned, I said. Based on your role in the unit. Sure, Ethan said, still grinning. So you're telling me people actually call you that? Out loud. Every day. He exchanged a look with Megan, and I could see the disbelief there. They thought I was exaggerating. Or worse, making it up. Come on, Bree, he said. You don't really expect us to believe people call you Reaper 6. I set my fork down carefully. It's not about belief. It's just what it is. Mom cleared her throat. Let's not make a big thing out of it, she said, her voice light. It's just dinner. Just dinner. Just a call sign. Just a career. Just 14 months in a combat zone. Just. I picked my fork back up and took another bite. I didn't argue. What was the point? They saw me as the girl who'd left home at 22 and kept showing up every few years in a different uniform. They didn't see the officer. They didn't see the pilot. They didn't see the person who'd made decisions under fire, who'd landed birds in conditions that made seasoned crew chiefs go pale. They saw Brianna, the youngest daughter who'd always been good at fixing things. The conversation moved on. Ethan talked about a new client at work. Lena complained about a professor. Megan asked Mom for the pot roast recipe. I stayed quiet, answering when spoken to, nodding in the right places. At one point, Dad asked if I was planning to stay in. For now, I said. You ever think about what's next? He asked. Long term. I almost laughed. Long term. I'd spent the last year planning missions in 30-minute increments, calculating fuel loads and egress routes and casualty evacuation timelines. Long-term meant making it through the next flight. I'll figure it out, I said. He nodded, satisfied. He didn't push. None of them did. Because pushing meant engaging, and engaging meant trying to understand something they'd decided was beyond them. After dinner, I helped Mom clear the table. She squeezed my shoulder as I carried plates to the sink. It's good to have you home, she said. Thanks, Mom. They're just teasing, you know. Ethan didn't mean anything by it. I nodded. I knew he didn't mean harm. But intention wasn't the same as impact. I left that night around 9, told them I was staying at a hotel near base. Mom protested, said my room was still there, still mine, but I couldn't do it. Couldn't sleep in that twin bed under the same posters from high school, pretending I was still the girl who'd lived there. I drove back to the hotel in silence, windows down, letting the cool air clear my head. And I realized something I'd been avoiding for months. They would never understand. Not because they didn't care, but because they couldn't see past the version of me they'd built in their heads. I was Captain Brianna Vega. Call sign Reaper 6. I'd led crews through situations most people couldn't imagine. But to them, I'd always be the kid who fixed things and flew helicopters as a hobby. And maybe that was fine. Maybe I didn't need them to understand. But it still hurt. The signs had been there for years. I just hadn't wanted to see them. It started small. Text messages that took days to get responses. Phone calls that went to voicemail, then never got returned. During my first deployment, they'd been diligent. Weekly emails, care packages every month, Mom crying on video calls. By the second deployment, the emails came every few weeks. By the third, I was lucky to get a call on my birthday. I told myself they were busy. Dad had retired, but he'd taken up consulting work. Mom had her book club and her volunteer shifts at the library. Ethan had his career, his marriage, his own life. Lena had college. They had their worlds, and I had mine. But worlds were supposed to overlap, weren't they? That was what family meant. I remembered sending a photo once from Mosul. Nothing classified, just me standing in front of our hangar at sunset, the Blackhawks lined up behind me like a steel chorus. I'd captioned it something simple, "Another day at the office." Ethan had replied 3 days later, "Hope the food's better than your last sandbox vacation." I'd stared at that message for a long time. Sandbox vacation. Like I was on some kind of adventurous gap year, taking selfies at exotic locations. Not leading extractions under fire. Not making decisions that kept people alive. Megan was the worst about it. She had a way of talking to me like I was a curiosity, something to be observed and commented on from a safe distance. Once, at a family barbecue between deployments, she'd asked about my war stories, like she was requesting a party trick. "Do you ever get scared?" she'd asked, drink in hand, leaning in like we were sharing secrets. "Sometimes," I'd said. "But, like, really scared? Like thinking you might die?" "Yeah," I'd said. "Sometimes." She'd nodded, fascinated, then turned to someone else and changed the subject. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was that she didn't know how to care. I was a novelty. A conversation starter. The sister-in-law who did something interesting. I'd brushed it off at the time. You had to in this job. Civilians didn't understand, and that was fine. You couldn't expect them to. The gap between their lives and yours was too wide, the experiences too different. You learned to translate yourself into terms they could grasp, to sand down the sharp edges of what you did so it didn't make them uncomfortable. But the gap kept widening. Mom had started doing this thing where she'd change the subject whenever deployments came up. We'd be on the phone, and I'd mention an upcoming rotation, and she'd interrupt with something about Lena's classes or Dad's golf game. "Let's not talk about danger over dinner," she'd said once, cutting me off mid-sentence. I'd stopped talking. It wasn't malicious. I knew that. She was scared in her way. Scared of losing me, scared of imagining what I did, scared of the reality that her daughter flew into places most people only saw on the news. So she chose not to imagine it at all. Easier that way. But it meant she didn't see me. Didn't see the work, the responsibility, the weight of command. She saw the uniform, sure. She'd introduce me to her friends as my daughter, the pilot. But it was always said with a hint of confusion, like she was still waiting for me to come to my senses and pick a real career. Dad was more direct about it. He'd ask questions sometimes, practical ones, about pay scales and benefits and retirement plans. He'd been an accountant for 35 years. Everything was numbers to him. Once, when I'd mentioned being promoted to captain, he'd asked what that meant in terms of salary increase. "It's not really about the pay," I'd said. He'd frowned, genuinely puzzled. "Then what's it about?" I hadn't known how to answer that. How do you explain command to someone who's never held it? How do you describe the weight of being responsible for lives, for missions, for decisions that don't have clean answers? You don't. You just nod and change the subject. Ethan was different. He wasn't confused or scared, he was dismissive. It wasn't active hostility, just a kind of benign disinterest mixed with mild condescension. He'd always been the golden child, the one who'd done everything right. Good college, good job, good marriage. His life made sense to our parents. Mine didn't. He'd ask about the military the way you'd ask someone about a hobby. "Still doing the army thing?" Like it was a phase. Like I'd wake up one day and realize I should have gone to business school instead. During my last visit home before this deployment, he'd made a comment that stuck with me. We'd been sitting in the backyard, just the two of us, and he'd asked if I ever thought about settling down. "I am settled," I'd said. "No, I mean really settled. Normal job, normal life. Maybe find someone, start a family." "I have a job," I'd said. "And a life." "You know what I mean," he'd said, not unkindly. "Something stable." I'd wanted to laugh. Stable. I'd flown 67 missions in the last year. I'd landed in hot zones, under fire, with wounded crew members and failing instruments. I'd made split-second decisions that determined whether people lived or died. And he thought I needed stability. But I just nodded. Said something non-committal. "Let it go." Because that was what you did. You let it go. The distance grew. Not all at once, but gradually, like erosion. Each dismissive comment, each subject change, each unreturned call wore away a little more of the connection. By the time I left for this deployment, I'd stopped expecting them to understand. I told myself it didn't matter. I had my crew, my unit, the people who got it. That was enough. But standing in that hotel room the night after the welcome home dinner, staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, I realized I'd been lying to myself. It did matter. They were my family. And they saw me as a stranger. The betrayal wasn't what they'd said. It was what they couldn't see. I'd given them everything. Paid off debts, covered emergencies, shown up when they needed me. I'd been loyal, reliable, constant. And in return, they'd given me polite detachment and casual mockery. They'd laughed at my call sign. At the name I'd earned through blood and fire and decisions that still woke me up at night. They'd laughed because they thought it was make-believe. And maybe that hurt most of all. Not that they didn't understand what I did, but that they thought I'd lie about it. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and pulled out my phone. Scrolled through old messages. Saw the pattern I'd been ignoring, me reaching out, them responding days later with one-line answers. Me sharing pieces of my life, them changing the subject. I wasn't angry. Anger would have been easier. I was just tired. Tired of translating myself. Tired of making myself smaller so they'd feel comfortable. Tired of pretending their indifference didn't sting. I opened my email and looked at the commendation letter sitting in my drafts. The distinguished flying cross. For the Mosul extraction, the one where we'd lost comms and landed under fire to pull out a wounded team. Colonel Hayes had written the recommendation himself. It wasn't official yet, wouldn't be for another few weeks, but it was coming. I thought about showing them. Proving it. But what would that accomplish? They'd nod, say they were proud, then go back to not understanding. No. If they were going to see it, it wouldn't be because I showed them. It would be because the world did. I closed the email and turned off the light. Tomorrow, I'd go back for one more dinner. Play the part. Be the daughter they expected. And then I'd leave. Not dramatically, not with speeches or confrontations. Just quietly, the way you step away from something that doesn't fit anymore. They'd never respect words. But maybe someday they'd see. And maybe that would be enough. The second dinner was Mom's idea. One more meal before you head back to base, she'd said. I hadn't corrected her. I wasn't heading back to base, not officially. I had 3 weeks of leave left. But it was easier to let her think I was busy, needed elsewhere. I showed up at 6, same as before. Ethan and Megan were already there, drinks in hand. Lena was running late, something about a study group. The house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic. Glad you could make it, Dad said, like I'd had a choice. We settled into the dining room, same seats as before. The conversation was lighter this time, more careful. Like they'd all agreed not to push. Ethan asked about my plans, and I gave vague answers. Megan talked about a vacation they were planning to Costa Rica. Mom fussed over whether the chicken was too dry. It was fine. Surface level fine. I was cutting into my chicken when the TV in the living room cut to a loud chime, the breaking news sound that makes everyone stop talking. Dad had left it on CNN, volume low, the way he always did during dinner. Should I turn that off? He asked. Leave it, Mom said. Might be something important. The anchor's voice carried into the dining room. We're bringing you exclusive footage tonight from a recently declassified military operation in Iraq. This video, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request, shows a dramatic rescue mission near Mosul last year. The room went still. Not because anyone thought it was about me, but because war footage always got people's attention. Ethan stood up, walked to the living room doorway. Come look at this. We followed. All of us, plates abandoned, drawn by the same morbid curiosity people always have when someone else's danger becomes entertainment. The screen showed aerial footage, grainy, but clear enough. A Black Hawk coming in fast and low over a bombed-out street, dust and smoke everywhere. Tracers lit up the twilight ground fire, close enough to be terrifying. The bird didn't waver. Just kept descending, steady, controlled. That's insane, Ethan muttered. Who would fly into that? The camera angle shifted, ground footage now, helmet cam from one of the soldiers being extracted. You could hear the rotor wash, the shouting, the controlled chaos of a hot extraction. And underneath it, calm and clear over the radio, Reaper 6, dust off complete. We're wheels up in 30 seconds. My voice. Mom's hand went to her mouth. The footage kept rolling. The Black Hawk lifted off, took fire on the climb out, banked hard left. You could see the crew chief returning fire from the door. Then the feed cut back to the studio. The anchor looked directly at the camera. The pilot of that aircraft was U.S. Army Captain Brianna Vega, who was later awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for actions during this mission. 3 soldiers were successfully extracted under heavy fire, with no casualties. The Pentagon declassified this footage earlier this week. Silence. Complete, suffocating silence. I hadn't moved. Hadn't reacted. I just stood there in the doorway, watching my family process what they'd just seen. Lena walked in from the front door, late, oblivious. Sorry, traffic was. She stopped when she saw everyone frozen in front of the TV. What's going on? That was Brianna, Mom whispered. What was Brianna? On the news, Ethan said. His voice was strange. Hollow. That was her. Flying that helicopter. Lena looked at the TV, then at me. Wait. That footage, that was you. I nodded once. The call sign they said, Megan said slowly. Reaper 6. That's what you said at dinner. She stopped herself, but the damage was done. Ethan turned to look at me. His face had gone pale. Jesus, Bree. That was real. You actually, yeah, I said quietly. When did this happen? February. Last year. And you didn't tell us? I tried, I said. Not angry, just factual. I sent photos. Updates. You made jokes about sandbox vacations. He flinched. Mom was crying now, silent tears running down her face. Dad had sunk into his armchair, staring at the TV even though they'd moved on to the next story. The Distinguished Flying Cross, Megan said, still processing. That's a big deal, isn't it? Yeah, Lena said softly. It's a really big deal. I didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. The footage had said everything I couldn't. Why didn't you tell us it was that serious? Mom asked. We thought you were just. I don't know. Flying supplies or something. I did tell you, I said. You didn't want to hear it. That's not fair, Ethan said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Isn't it? I kept my tone level. Not accusatory, just honest. Last week, you laughed when I told you my call sign. You said I made it up. You thought I was exaggerating. We didn't know, he said. You didn't ask. The words landed like stones. Dad finally spoke. I think we owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, I said. But maybe you could try to understand that when I tell you something about my life, I'm not making it up. I'm not exaggerating. I'm just telling you the truth. Mom crossed the room and hugged me hard. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I let her hold me, but I didn't cry. Didn't crumble. I'd done my crying months ago, alone in a barracks room halfway around the world, wondering why the people who were supposed to know me best couldn't see me at all. When she pulled back, her face was wrecked. Were you scared? During that mission? Terrified, I said. But you didn't sound scared. On the radio. That's the job. She nodded like she was starting to understand, even though I knew she wasn't. Not really. But maybe understanding wasn't the point. Maybe belief was enough. Ethan stepped forward. I'm sorry, Bree. I really am. I didn't take it seriously. I should have. Yeah, I said. You should have. He looked like he wanted to say more, but I wasn't interested in a long conversation. Not now. Not here. Lena was still staring at the TV, even though they were talking about stock markets now. You're actually a war hero, she said quietly. I'm a pilot, I said. Who did her job? Don't downplay it, Dad said. His voice was rough. You saved lives. That's not nothing. I know it's not nothing, I said. I've always known that. The unspoken words hung there. You're the ones who thought it was nothing. We stood there in the living room, the dinner growing cold in the next room. Everything fundamentally changed. They looked at me differently now. I could see it in their faces, guilt, confusion. Like I'd transformed into someone else right in front of them. But I hadn't transformed. I'd always been this person. They just hadn't been paying attention. I should go, I said. Please stay, Mom said. We can talk. Really talk. Not tonight, I said. I need some space. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door. No one tried to stop me. As I reached for the doorknob, Ethan called out, "Bree?" I turned. "I'm proud of you," he said. I should have said that a long time ago. I nodded. Didn't trust myself to speak. And then I left. The night air was cold against my face as I walked to my car. Behind me, through the window, I could see them still standing in the living room, talking animatedly, probably replaying the footage in their minds. They'd seen it now. The truth. Not because I'd convinced them, but because the world had shown them. I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. Felt the weight of the moment settling over me like a blanket. This was supposed to be the victory, wasn't it? The vindication? So why did I still feel empty? I drove back to the hotel, the streets quiet, the world oblivious. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear sirens. Life continuing, indifferent to small family dramas and old wounds finally exposed. They believed me now. But I'd already stopped needing them to. The hotel room felt smaller that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my jacket, staring at nothing. My phone buzzed, Mom, then Ethan, then Lena. All within 10 minutes. I turned it face down on the nightstand. I kept replaying the moment. Not the news footage, I'd seen that before, had been briefed when they'd told us it was being declassified. No, I kept replaying the look on their faces. The shock. The disbelief giving way to something like horror, like they'd just realized they'd been living next to a stranger. Maybe they had been. I pulled off my jacket and boots, then lay back on the bed fully clothed. The ceiling had a water stain in the corner, shaped like a bird. I stared at it and let my mind drift back, not to the living room, but to Mosul. February 14th, specifically. Valentine's Day, though no one had mentioned it. We'd gotten the call at 2100 hours. Team trapped, heavy contact, one urgent surgical. The kind of call that makes your blood go cold even when you're trained for it. I'd been in the TOC when it came through, reviewing flight logs. Colonel Hayes had looked at me, and I'd nodded before he'd even asked. Reaper 6, you're up. I'd grabbed my crew, Dalton Reyes on guns, CW2 Marcus Chin as co-pilot, and Specialist Ana Ruiz on comms. We'd been in the air in 12 minutes. Fast, but not fast enough. Never fast enough when someone's bleeding out. The approach had been textbook nightmare fuel. Zero visibility from smoke, buildings on 3 sides, hostile fire from at least 2 positions. Chin had called out the tracers, voice steady. We've got fire, 10 and 2 o'clock. I see it, I'd said. Stay on approach. You don't think in moments like that. You can't. Thinking means hesitation, and hesitation means people die. You fly on instinct and training and a kind of cold clarity that feels almost like calm. We touched down in a street barely wide enough for the rotor span. The team had come running, 4 of them, carrying a 5th. The urgent surgical, chest wound, barely conscious. Ruiz had helped load while Reyes laid down suppressing fire. 30 seconds, Hayes had said on the news. It had felt longer. The climb out had been worse than the approach. We'd taken fire from a rooftop, rounds punching through the tail section. One had gone through Reyes' shoulder, and he'd kept shooting. Hadn't even told me he was hit until we were clear. Reaper 6, you're trailing smoke, another bird had called. Copy that. We're still flying. We'd made it back. All of us. The surgical had lived. I'd gotten an email from him 3 months later, thanking me, telling me about his kids. His name was Connor Walsh, and his daughters were 7 and 5, and he'd made it home to see them because we'd flown into hell and pulled him out. That was what the call sign meant. That was what the job was. And my family had thought I'd made it up. I rolled onto my side, pulled a pillow against my chest. I wasn't angry anymore, not really. Anger required energy I didn't have. What I felt was something closer to resignation. A quiet acceptance that there were parts of my life they would never touch, experiences they would never understand. Maybe that was okay. Maybe it had to be. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. Instead, I thought about what came next. I had 3 weeks of leave, but I didn't want to spend them here. Didn't want to navigate the awkward aftermath, the overcompensating attempts at connection, the guilt they'd try to process by suddenly treating me like I was fragile. I wasn't fragile. I was tired. I'd go back to Fort Rucker early. Put in for the instructor post I'd been considering. Training new pilots, passing on what I'd learned. It was a good next step. Stable, relatively safe, still meaningful. And it would give me distance from the combat rotations, from the constant deployments, from the weight of decisions that left marks you couldn't see. From my family, too. Though I didn't let myself think that part too clearly. I pulled out my laptop and started drafting the request. The words came easily. They always did when it was official correspondence. I could translate myself into military language, reduce complex emotions to clean administrative prose. It was soothing in its way. Somewhere around midnight, I finally checked my phone. Mom, please call me when you can. I need to talk to you. Ethan, I'm sorry. Really? Can we meet tomorrow? Lena, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I don't know what to say except I'm sorry I didn't know. And one from Dad, sent an hour after I'd left. Your mother and I are proud of you. We should have said it more. We should have said it first. I read them twice, then set the phone down again. I'd respond tomorrow. Tonight, I just needed quiet. I thought about Connor Walsh's daughters. 7 and 5. Old enough to understand their dad had been hurt, young enough to believe he was invincible now that he was home. They'd never know my name. Never know what that night had been like, how close it had come to ending differently. That was fine. That was the job. You didn't do it for recognition. But you did it hoping the people who mattered would see you. Really see you. And for the first time in years, mine finally had. Just not the way I'd wanted. I closed the laptop and turned off the light. Tomorrow, I'd deal with the calls and the conversations and the careful rebuilding. Tonight, I'd just sleep. Or try to. Outside, a car alarm went off, then stopped. The hotel's heating system clicked and hummed. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. The kind you only noticed when you'd spent enough time in places where silence meant danger. I pulled the blanket up and closed my eyes. And for the first time since I'd come home, I let myself feel it, not the hurt or the vindication, but the exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of carrying weight no one else could see. They saw it now. The footage had made sure of that. But I'd been carrying it all along. Whether they understood that or not, I still wasn't sure. I went back to my parents' house 3 days later. Not because they'd asked, though they had, repeatedly, but because leaving without closure felt wrong. Unfinished. Mom opened the door before I'd reached the porch. Her eyes were red-rimmed, face drawn. She'd been crying, probably more than once. Come in, she said. Please. The house was quiet. Just her and Dad. Ethan and Lena had been told to give us space. Smart. We sat in the living room, me on the couch, them in the chairs across from me. The TV was off. The silence felt deliberate, weighty. We've been talking, Dad said. Your mother and I. About everything. I waited. We realize we haven't been fair to you, he continued. We didn't take your career seriously. We didn't listen when you tried to tell us. We were scared, Mom added. Every time you deployed, I was terrified. So I pretended it wasn't as dangerous as it was. I convinced myself you were safe. I understand, I said. And I did. Fear made people do strange things. But that's not an excuse, Dad said. You deserved better from us. You deserved respect. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I did. Mom flinched at that, but I didn't soften it. It was true. We want to do better, she said. We want to understand. To really understand. That's going to take time, I said. And effort. You can't just watch one news segment and suddenly get what the last 10 years of my life have been. We know, Dad said. But we want to try. I looked at them, really looked at them. Saw the age in their faces, the guilt, the genuine desire to bridge a gap they'd only just realized existed. They were trying. That counted for something. Okay, I said. We can try. Mom exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. Thank you. But I need you to understand something, I said. I'm not going to explain myself anymore. I'm not going to justify my choices or prove that what I do matters. Either you believe me or you don't. We believe you, Dad said firmly. We do. Then act like it, I said. When I tell you about my job, listen. When I'm deployed, check in. When I come home, don't treat it like I'm returning from vacation. We will, Mom said. I promise. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. But another part, the part that had learned to protect itself, remained skeptical. Words were easy. Actions were what mattered. I'm putting in for an instructor position, I said. At Fort Rucker. If it goes through, I'll be stateside for the next few years. Mom's face brightened. That's wonderful. It means fewer deployments, I said. But it doesn't mean I'm leaving the army. We understand, Dad said. We talked for another hour. They asked questions, real ones, not the surface-level inquiries from before. What was flight school like? How did I get my call sign? What happened during missions I couldn't tell them about? I answered what I could, kept the classified details vague. They listened. Actually listened. And slowly, carefully, something started to shift. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was movement. When I stood to leave, Mom hugged me again. I love you, she said. I'm so proud of you. I know, Mom. Do you? She asked. Because I don't think we've said it enough. You haven't, I said honestly. But you're saying it now. She held me tighter. Ethan called that evening. I was back at the hotel, packing my things when the phone rang. Hey, he said when I answered. Hey, can we talk? In person? I hesitated, then agreed. We met at a coffee shop near the highway, neutral territory. He looked rough. Tired. Like he hadn't been sleeping well. I've been thinking about what you said, he started. About how I didn't take you seriously. About the jokes. Okay. I was an asshole, he said bluntly. And I'm sorry. I stirred my coffee, said nothing. I think I was jealous, he continued. Which is stupid, because you were literally risking your life, but I was jealous that you had this thing, this purpose, and I was just selling software. There's nothing wrong with selling software, I said. I know. But it's not the same, is it? You're actually doing something that matters. What you do matters too, I said. Just differently. He shook his head. You don't have to be nice about it. I'm not being nice. I'm being honest. The world needs people who do what you do. It also needs people who do what I do. They're different roles. He looked at me for a long moment. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise, I said. I'm just tired of pretending things are more complicated than they are. We sat in silence for a while. Then he asked, are we okay? We're getting there, I said. But it's going to take time. I know. And you can't make jokes about my job anymore, I added. Not even the friendly kind. Understood. And if I tell you something, you have to believe me. Even if it sounds impossible. I will, he said. I promise. I nodded. Then yeah, we're getting there. He smiled, small, but genuine. Thank you. For what? For giving me another chance. I finished my coffee, didn't answer right away. Finally, you're my brother. That's what family does. Even when family screws up? Especially then. We left the coffee shop together, stood in the parking lot for a moment. He hugged me quick, awkward, but real. Be safe, he said. Wherever you end up. Always am. Reaper 6, he said, testing it out. It suits you. I smiled despite myself. Thanks. I drove back to the hotel and finished packing. Tomorrow, I'd head south. Start the next chapter. The transition felt right, not an ending, but a shift. My phone buzzed one more time. Lena, love you, sis. Proud of you. Always have been, even when I didn't know how to show it. I typed back, love you too. And for the first time in days, I felt something like peace. They'd never fully understand. That was okay. Understanding wasn't required. Belief was. Respect was. And maybe slowly we were getting there. I turned off the light and lay down. Tomorrow would come. New challenges, new students, new ways to matter. But tonight, I could rest. Finally. Fort Rucker in Alabama felt different than Fort Belvoir. Hotter, flatter, less tethered to the civilian world. It was pure army, helicopters overhead constantly, the smell of fuel and cut grass, the sound of rotors beating against humid air. I arrived in late October. The instructor position had gone through faster than I'd expected. Colonel Hayes had written me a recommendation that probably could have gotten me assigned to the moon if I'd asked. Within 2 weeks, I had base housing, a schedule, and a roster of 12 new students. The work was different. Instead of flying combat missions, I was teaching people how to survive them. Instead of making split-second decisions under fire, I was explaining the theory behind those decisions in climate-controlled classrooms and controlled flight exercises. It should have felt like a step down. It didn't. There was something profound about passing on knowledge you'd earned through experience. These weren't kids playing soldier, they were commissioned officers, some of them older than me, who'd chosen aviation and needed to learn how to stay alive long enough to matter. My first class was on emergency procedures. I stood at the front of the room, 12 faces looking back at me, and started with a question. How many of you have been in a bird that took fire? 3 hands went up. Combat veterans, prior enlisted, a few rotations under their belts. How many of you froze the first time it happened? 2 of the 3 hands stayed up. Honest. Good. That's normal, I said. Your brain isn't wired to stay calm when metal is punching through your aircraft at 1,500 feet per second. But you're going to learn how to override that instinct. Because your crew is depending on you to fly, not to freeze. I taught them the technical stuff, control recovery, engine failure protocols, auto-rotation procedures. But I also taught them the other stuff. The mental game. How to compartmentalize fear. How to keep your voice steady on the radio even when your hands are shaking. How to make decisions when every option is bad and you have to choose the least bad one. They listened. Really listened. Because they knew I wasn't teaching from a manual, I was teaching from a scar. Word spread fast on base. New instructor, call sign Reaper 6, DFC recipient from the Mosul extraction. People treated me differently, not quite deference, but a certain respect that came with proven competence. It was strange, being known for something specific rather than just being another captain in a sea of officers. I didn't lean into it. Didn't tell war stories in the O Club or wear my awards on my flight suit unless required. But I didn't hide it either. It was part of who I was now. 3 weeks in, one of my students, Lieutenant Sarah Chin, no relation to my old co-pilot, stayed after class. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Go ahead. How do you deal with it? She asked. After. When you're home, and you remember what happened. I studied her. She had that look, the one that meant she'd already seen something, already had memories she couldn't shake. You talked to someone qualified, I said. A chaplain, a therapist, someone trained in this. And you remember that what you're feeling is normal. Did you? She asked. Talk to someone? Yeah, I said. Took me a while to start, but yeah. She nodded, relieved. Thank you, ma'am. Chin. Yes, ma'am. You're going to be a good pilot, I said. Don't let the weight of it make you think otherwise. She smiled, small but genuine. Yes, ma'am. The months passed. Fall turned to winter, though in Alabama that barely meant anything. I fell into a rhythm, teaching, flying orientation flights with students, reviewing their progress, writing evaluations. It was structured, predictable, safe. I talked to my family more. Scheduled calls every Sunday, not waiting for them to reach out first. Mom asked better questions now. Dad actually listened to the answers. Ethan sent me articles about military aviation, trying to understand. Lena started a project about women in the military for one of her classes, interviewed me over video call. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes they still said things that revealed how little they grasped about my world. But they were trying. That counted. In January, the awards ceremony happened. The Distinguished Flying Cross, officially presented. My family flew down for it, all of them, even Megan. They sat in the audience at the base chapel, dressed in their best clothes, watching as the colonel pinned the medal to my uniform. For heroism while participating in aerial flight, the citation read, Captain Vega's exceptional skill and courage under fire directly resulted in the successful extraction of 5 personnel from a hostile environment, preventing certain casualties. I stood at attention, stone-faced, the way you're supposed to. But I could see Mom crying in the 3rd row, and Dad with his hand over his heart, and Ethan recording on his phone. Afterward, there was a reception. My students came, some of my fellow instructors, a few senior officers. My family stood awkwardly near the refreshments until Lena dragged them over to introduce themselves. Your Reaper 6 family? One of my students asked. We are, Dad said, and I heard the pride in his voice. Real, unfiltered pride. She's a legend, sir, the student said. Best instructor on base. Dad smiled. We're starting to understand that. I watched from across the room, talking to Colonel Hayes about the next class rotation. Watched my family navigate this world that had always been foreign to them, trying to understand, trying to belong. They didn't belong here. They never would. But they were showing up. That was enough. Hayes noticed where I was looking. Good family. They're learning, I said. He nodded. That's all you can ask. Later, at dinner off base, Ethan raised his glass. To Brianna, he said. Who's been a hero all along, even when we were too stupid to see it. I'm not a hero, I said automatically. You are to us, Mom said quietly. I looked around the table. At their faces, earnest and trying. At the effort they were making, the distance they were closing. Thank you, I said. For being here. Where else would we be? Lena asked. And I realized, maybe for the first time, that I believed her. We'd been broken. We'd hurt each other. But we were rebuilding. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. The gap would never fully close. They'd never fully understand what I'd seen, what I'd done, what the job had cost. But they didn't need to understand everything. They just needed to respect it. And finally, they did. I went to bed that night in my base housing, the medal sitting on my desk in its case. I thought about Connor Walsh's daughters, about Sarah Chen's question, about all the people whose lives intersected with mine in ways they'd never fully know. I thought about my family, sleeping in a hotel across town, probably rehashing the ceremony, trying to process what they'd witnessed. And I thought about Mosul. That street, those 30 seconds, the weight of decisions made under fire. I'd done my job. I'd saved lives. I'd earned the call sign, earned the respect, earned the medal. But more than any of that, I'd earned peace with myself. They'd needed the news footage to believe me. They'd needed the ceremony to see me. But I'd always known who I was. And that, in the end, was what mattered most. 2 years later, I stood at the edge of the flight line watching one of my former students, now Captain Sarah Chen, receive her wings. She'd completed advanced training, passed her evaluations, earned her first assignment. She was ready. The ceremony was small, just her family and a few instructors. I wasn't required to be there, but I'd come anyway. You showed up for your people. Chen saw me in the crowd and smiled. After the official part ended, she made her way over. Thank you for coming, ma'am. Wouldn't miss it, I said. Congratulations. I'm nervous, she admitted. Good, I said. Means you're taking it seriously. Did you ever stop being nervous? She asked. Before flights. I thought about it. No. I just learned to use it. Fear keeps you sharp as long as you don't let it control you. She nodded, absorbing that. Will you tell me one thing? Before I go. Sure. That mission. Mosul. Were you scared? Everyone asked eventually. It was always the same question. Terrified, I said. Every second. But you did it anyway. That's the job, I said. You do it anyway. She smiled. Reaper 6. That's me. Think I'll earn a call sign like that? You'll earn your own, I said. Better, probably. She laughed, then hugged me, quick and unprofessional, but genuine. Thank you. For everything. Stay safe out there, I said. And remember what I taught you. Always. I watched her rejoin her family, watched her parents hug her, watched the pride on their faces. They understood what she was about to do. They believed in her. That was the difference. My own family had arrived the day before. They were visiting for Thanksgiving, becoming an almost annual tradition now. Mom was attempting to cook a turkey in my tiny base housing kitchen. Dad was watching football. Ethan and Megan had brought their new baby, a daughter named Claire. Lena was on break from grad school. We'd settled into something resembling normal. They asked about my work, and I told them. They shared their lives, and I listened. The conversations were real now, not performance, not pretense. At dinner that night, cramped around my small dining table, Mom asked about the ceremony. How'd your student do? Good, I said. She's ready. Must be rewarding, Dad said. Teaching. It is, I said. Different than flying, but important. Do you miss it? Lena asked. Combat flying? I considered the question. Sometimes. But this matters too. Maybe more, in the long run. Ethan bounced Claire on his knee. You think you'll ever go back? To deployments? Maybe, I said. if they need me. But I'm good where I am for now. We're glad, Mom said. That you're stateside. That you're safe. I'm always safe, Mom, I said gently. Safer, she amended. I smiled. Okay, safer. After dinner, I stepped outside for air. The November night was cool, clear. I could hear helicopters in the distance, night training ops. The sound was familiar, comforting. Lena joined me on the porch. You okay? Yeah, I said. Just thinking. About what? About how things change, I said. How people change. She nodded. We really were awful to you. Before. You were clueless, I said. Not the same as awful. Still, she said. I'm sorry it took so long. Me too. We stood in comfortable silence for a while. Then she asked, Are you happy? Really happy. I thought about it. About my students, my work, my family slowly learning to understand. About the scars I carried and the peace I'd made with them. Yeah, I said. I think I am. Good, she said. You deserve to be. Inside, I could hear Ethan laughing at something Dad said, could hear Mom scolding them both for being too loud near the baby. Normal sounds. Family sounds. They'd laughed at my call sign at dinner 2 years ago. Had mocked me, dismissed me, failed to see me. But Mom had turned on the news, and everything had changed. Not because of the news, because of what the news revealed. The truth I'd been trying to tell them all along. I wasn't bitter about it anymore. Wasn't hurt. They'd needed proof, and life had given it to them. That was fine. We'd all moved forward. Colonel Hayes appeared in my memory, something he'd said during our last one-on-one. You can't control how people see you, Captain. You can only control how you see yourself. I'd earned my place. Earned my call sign. Earned my peace. And my family had finally earned their way back into understanding. 2 years ago, I'd felt empty after the vindication. Like proving them wrong hadn't filled the hole their doubt had created. But I understood now, it wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. About trusting my own assessment of who I was and what I'd done, regardless of whether anyone else believed it. The news footage had changed their minds. But I'd already known the truth. And that certainty, that quiet confidence, was what I'd been searching for all along. Lena headed back inside, and I lingered a moment longer. Watched the stars, listened to the distant rotors, felt the weight of everything I'd carried and everything I'd learned. They say you can't change how people see you. Maybe that's true. But sometimes, life changes it for you, one landing at a time. And sometimes, you realize it doesn't matter what they see. What matters is what you know. I turned and walked back inside, back to my family, back to the warmth and noise and imperfect love that had finally learned to recognize me. Back to the life I'd built. One flight at a time. 3 years is a long time in the military. Long enough for orders to change, for priorities to shift, for everything you thought was settled to append itself. I learned that the hard way in April, when Colonel Hayes called me into his office with that particular expression that meant my comfortable instructor life was about to get complicated. Captain Vega, he said, gesturing to a chair. Close the door. I did. Sat down. Waited. You've done exceptional work here, he started. Your students consistently rank among the highest performers in their operational assignments. You've built a program that's become a model for other installations. Thank you, sir. Which is why I hate to do this, he said. But we need you elsewhere. My stomach dropped. Sir, Joint Task Force. Multinational training operation in Poland. They need an experienced combat pilot who can also teach. Someone who's seen real action and can prepare allied forces for realistic scenarios. He slid a folder across the desk. It's a year-long assignment. You'd be training Polish and Romanian aviators primarily, with some NATO integration exercises. I opened the folder. Read the first page. Felt the weight of it settling over me. When? I asked. 8 weeks. June 1st. I nodded slowly. A year in Poland. A year away from the comfortable rhythm I'd built, the life that finally made sense, the family relationships I'd carefully reconstructed. This is voluntary, Hayes said, reading my face. I can find someone else. But you're my first choice. You're everyone's first choice. Can I think about it? Take 48 hours, he said. But Brianna, This is the kind of assignment that shapes a career. You do well here, you're looking at major ahead of schedule. Maybe even a command position after that. I left his office with the folder under my arm and a decision weighing on me like extra fuel load. That night, I called my family. Conference call, something we'd started doing monthly, everyone on at once. It was chaotic, but it worked. Poland? Mom said when I told them. That's so far. It's Europe, Mom. Not Mars. For a year. Ethan asked. What about your students here? They'd assign someone else, I said. It's not about me specifically. It's about the program. But you built the program, Lena pointed out. She was finishing her PhD now, writing her dissertation on military family dynamics. This conversation was probably going to end up in her research. Programs outlive their builders, I said. That's the point. Do you want to go? Dad asked. The practical question, the one that mattered. I paused. Did I? Part of me loved the idea, new challenge, new environment, the chance to work with international forces and expand my skill set. Part of me hated it, leaving stability, leaving the life I'd fought to build, starting over again. I don't know, I admitted. It's a good opportunity. But, Mom prompted. But I'm tired of starting over, I said. I've been doing that my whole career. New base, new assignment, new everything. I finally have something stable. Stable isn't always growth, Ethan said. You taught me that. I did. Yeah. When I was thinking about leaving my company last year, you told me comfort is the enemy of progress. I laughed to spite myself. I forgot I said that. Well, you did. And you were right. We talked for another hour. They asked good questions about the assignment, about what I wanted long-term, about whether this was fear or wisdom talking. In the end, they didn't tell me what to do. Just listened. Whatever you decide, Mom said before we hung up, we support you. We're proud of you. That doesn't change. I know, Mom. Do you? She asked, echoing her question from years ago. Because I want to make sure you really know. I do, I said. And I meant it. I spent the next day talking to people whose opinions mattered. Former students who'd deployed, who understood what it meant to choose between comfortable and challenging. Fellow instructors who'd faced similar decisions. A chaplain who helped me sort through the tangle of obligation and desire and fear. By the evening of the second day, I knew. I found Colonel Hayes in his office, late as usual. Sir, I said. I'll take it. He smiled. Good. I'll notify the task force commander. One condition, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Captain, when I come back, I want to be considered for a command position. Not just instruction. Actual operational command. He studied me for a moment. You thinking long-term career? I'm thinking I've spent 3 years teaching people how to lead, I said. Maybe it's time I did it again myself. Fair enough, he said. I'll make sure that's documented in your eval. Do well in Poland, and you'll have options. The next 8 weeks were a blur. Out processing, briefings, medical updates, language basics, enough Polish to be polite, enough NATO protocol to not embarrass myself. I handed off my students to Captain Rodriguez, a solid pilot who'd understand what I'd built and maintain it. Sarah Chin, now deployed in Germany, sent me an email. Heard you're heading to Europe. Buy you a beer if our schedules align. I wrote back, deal. My family came to visit one last time before I left. We spent a long weekend in Alabama, nothing special, just time together. Claire was 3 now, talking constantly, asking questions about everything. She wanted to know if helicopters were loud, if Poland had playgrounds, if I'd bring her back a toy. Maybe, I said, bouncing her on my knee. If I find a good one. A helicopter toy, she specified. Ethan laughed. Kid knows what she wants. On the last night, we had dinner at a restaurant off base, Italian place, nothing fancy. Over pasta and wine, the conversation turned reflective. Remember when you came home 5 years ago? Lena asked. That first dinner? Unfortunately, I said. I was such an idiot, Ethan said. We all were. You were civilians, I said. You didn't know. We should have known to trust you, Mom said quietly. That's what I regret most. Not that we didn't understand, that we didn't believe you. We're past it, I said. Really? Are we? Dad asked. Or are you just saying that? I considered the question honestly. We're past it. What happened then made us better now. I wouldn't change that. Even the painful parts? Lena asked. Especially those, I said. Pain teaches things comfort never could. Megan, who'd been quiet most of the evening, spoke up. Can I say something? Of course, I said. I was the worst, she said. That first dinner. The video game comment. I was condescending and dismissive, and I'm ashamed of it. Megan, no, let me finish, she said. I didn't understand military service. I'd never known anyone who served. And instead of admitting my ignorance and learning, I made jokes. I made you feel small. And I'm sorry. I reached across the table, squeezed her hand. Thank you. That means a lot. You've taught me more than you know, she said. About courage and sacrifice and what it means to actually serve something bigger than yourself. The table went quiet. Claire, sensing the mood, climbed into my lap. Ampri. Yeah, sweetheart. Are you scared? To go far away. I looked around the table. At these people who'd hurt me and healed me, who'd failed me and found me, who'd become the family I needed them to be. A little, I admitted. But that's okay. Being scared means it matters. Mommy says brave means doing it even when you're scared, Claire said. Your mommy's smart, I said. Ethan grinned. Don't tell her that. Her head's big enough already. We laughed, and the heaviness lifted. The rest of dinner was lighter, jokes and stories and plans for visits. Mom made me promise to call every week. Dad slipped me an envelope with money for emergencies. Lena said she'd fly out sometime during the year if her schedule allowed. They drove me to the airport. All of them, crammed into Ethan's SUV, Claire singing songs in her car seat. At the departure curb, we did the awkward shuffle of too many people trying to hug one person. Be safe, Mom said, crying despite her best efforts. Always am, I said. We love you, Dad said. We're proud of you. Don't forget that. I won't. Claire gave me a drawing she'd made, stick figures holding hands under a helicopter. So you remember us, she said. I folded it carefully and put it in my pocket. I could never forget you. I watched them drive away, watched Ethan's SUV disappear into traffic. Felt the familiar mix of anticipation and melancholy that came with every departure. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't leaving behind people who didn't understand me. I was leaving behind people who'd learned to. Who'd put in the work, made the effort, closed the gap as much as any gap could be closed. The flight to Poland was long, Atlanta to Frankfurt to Warsaw, then a military transport to the base. I spent most of it reading briefing materials and trying to sleep. When I finally arrived, jet-lagged and disoriented, a Polish Air Force major was waiting. Captain Vega, he asked in accented but clear English. That's me. Major Piotr Kowalski. I'll be your liaison. Welcome to Poland. He drove me to the base, pointed out key buildings, gave me the rundown. The Joint Task Force was smaller than I'd expected, about 40 personnel, mix of American, Polish, Romanian, and British. Tight-knit group, he said. Everyone pulled their weight. We've heard of you, he said as we walked. Reaper 6, yes? The Mosul extraction. That was a long time ago, I said. Not so long, he said. And here, reputation matters. The pilots you'll train, they need to know you've done this for real. I settled into my quarters, unpacked my gear, hung Claire's drawing on the wall. Looked around the small room and thought about all the rooms I'd lived in over the years. All the temporary homes, all the fresh starts. But I wasn't starting fresh. Not really. I was building on what I'd already built, on skills earned, lessons learned, relationships forged. The work started immediately. My students were experienced pilots, most with more flight hours than me. But they hadn't flown combat, hadn't made decisions under fire. That's what I was there to teach. You already know how to fly, I told them on the first day. I'm here to teach you how to survive. They listened, asked good questions, challenged assumptions. It was different than teaching American pilots, different culture, different military structure, different tactical approaches. But the fundamentals were the same. Fear and courage. Decision and consequence. Leading when everything's on the line. 3 months in, we ran a major NATO exercise, simulated combat rescue in hostile territory. My students flew the missions, and I observed from the ground with other instructors. One of the Romanian pilots, Captain Andrei Popescu, had a moment where everything went wrong at once. Simulated engine failure during approach, ground fire from opposing forces, communications disruption. All the worst things at the worst time. He could have aborted. Could have called the mission, pulled out, tried again. Instead, he pushed through. Landed the bird, got his team out, climbed away clean. After the debrief, he found me. I froze, he admitted. For maybe 2 seconds. I froze. But then you didn't, I said. I heard your voice, he said. From training. Fear keeps you sharp if you don't let it control you. So I used it. I smiled. That's all anyone can ask. Were you really that scared? In Mosul? Terrified, I said. Same answer I always gave. But you did it anyway. That's the job. He nodded, satisfied. Walked away a little taller. I realized then that this was why I'd come. Not for the career advancement, not for the resume line. For this, the moment when something I'd learned through pain helped someone else survive. When experience became legacy. I called home that night. Sunday call, like clockwork. How's Poland? Mom asked. Cold, I said. But good. Really good. You sound happy, Lena observed. I am, I said. And I was surprised to realize it was true. We talked about their lives, Ethan's work, Lena's dissertation, Claire's preschool adventures. Normal things. Family things. We miss you, Mom said. Miss you too, I said. But I'm where I need to be right now. We know, Dad said. We're proud of you. I smiled. I know, Dad. I really do. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet room and thought about the trajectory of the last 8 years. From that first painful homecoming to this moment, alone in Poland, but not lonely, far from family, but connected to them in ways that transcended distance. They'd laughed at my call sign, had doubted my truth, had needed proof before they could believe. But they'd learned, had grown, had become the family I needed them to be. And I'd learned too. Had stopped needing their validation to know my worth. Had found peace in my own assessment of who I was and what I'd done. The gap would never fully close. Some distances were unbridgeable, not because of lack of love, but because of fundamentally different lived experiences. But love didn't require perfect understanding. Just respect. Just effort. Just showing up, again and again, trying to close the gap even when you knew you'd never fully succeed. That was enough. I pulled out my phone and looked at Claire's drawing. Stick figures under a helicopter, holding hands. Simple. True. Perfect. I pinned it back on the wall and got ready for bed. Tomorrow, more training. More students learning to survive. More opportunities to turn pain into purpose, experience into legacy. The work continued. The mission evolved. But the core remained the same. I was Captain Brianna Vega. Call sign Reaper 6. And I knew exactly who I was. Finally, completely, without doubt. And that made all the difference. Here's where I'll leave it for now. If you've ever had your work laughed off until the truth hit the screen, I want to hear from you. Have you been underestimated by family or friends? What finally made them take you seriously? When respect shows up late, do you forgive or set firmer boundaries? If you were at that dinner table, what would you have said to them? Want to follow up on the Mosul mission, the rank path, or how I set boundaries afterward? Drop your story in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more true, no-drama narratives about earning respect and keeping it. Share this with someone who needs a quiet win today, and tap the bell so you don't miss what comes next.